Hi all, it's Jennifer Palmer here, and welcome to the WellyWalk Podcast. So this is the first official episode of the WellyWalk Podcast. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for coming along. This episode is about the catalyst that happened in my life and my little backstory that led to this thing and how it happened. I've thought a lot about how I'm going to tell you this little story, because the point of this podcast isn't that it's therapy for me. I'm not going to go back to my origin story, but there is so much relevance in our origin stories. I was listening to podcasts, and whenever a new podcast guest comes on, they say, okay, can you tell us a little bit about yourself for the audience? And they always have some nice little succinct story that encapsulates their journey that brought them to being the expert that they are and brought them to this podcast today, promoting whatever they're selling or whatever wisdom they have to share. And I thought about my background. And one of the things that struck me was that I automatically think about it in terms of failures, in terms of seeing my past as a series of misadventures. And it dawned on me that I have believed in this kind of negative backstory to myself, when actually I could flip it completely on its head and think of it a different way. And that's kind of been the theme of this year of what I've done. I've realized that I went from a place of feeling a complete loss of self, a mourning of self, like I no longer existed, and all of my hopes and the desires and dreams that I had when I was young and aspiring were dashed, and I couldn't see myself getting back on a trajectory or ever having the time or the energy or the health to actually materialize the things that I had wanted to achieve with my life. And here I was in a beautiful place. I finally had a house that I was proud of. I had 2 lovely children. I had a loving, beautiful husband. And yet I couldn't enjoy any of these things because I had ground myself into this hole. And my thoughts were just an echo chamber. They just spun around, repeating the same things over and over again. So have any of you seen the movie Labyrinth from the 1980s with David Bowie in it, Jim Henson? If you have, you might have an idea of the visual of something. I feel like I have gremlins, goblins that live on my back. You know, those negative voices that come into play whenever you're doing something and you have this voice in the back of your head that says, oh, that's rubbish. Just looking over your shoulder, just making sure they comment in the most negative way possible when you're trying to do something. Oh, don't say that out loud. They're going to think you're an idiot. Oh my gosh, look, the way they're looking at you. Oh, they think you're so stupid. Or, don't go introduce yourself to that person. Who do you think you are? You're nobody. These little voices that keep needling you and keep you subservient to them. I definitely have a lot of those gremlins, and I've sometimes more than others. And it's been a battle my whole life to keep them under control. And my visual of these gremlins now that I think about them, because for a long time I didn't think about them, I just lived with them. They were just me. They were my brain. They were the chatter going on in my brain. And for all I could tell, that was truth, right? That's reality. And I have a perfect conception of what reality is. It's these voices. And I knew that they weren't true in some respect. There was some part of me that knew that I was torturing myself, knew that I shouldn't trust it, knew that I should maybe take a second look. But when you're really overwhelmed with life, when life has you in a vice grip and you feel like you're on a treadmill that will never stop, and you're holding your cup of coffee desperately trying to get some energy and it's spilling all over the place because you're on this treadmill. And then you get your glass of wine towards the end of the evening and you're spilling your glass of wine everywhere. You're still on this treadmill and you're hurtling towards sleep and you really want to get a good night's sleep, but you can't get a good night's sleep. You get about 5 hours maybe if you're lucky, and you've got kids waking you up, or you've just gone to bed super late because you've been working late, and then you wake up automatically at some ungodly hour for no reason whatsoever and can't get back to sleep, and then you start the whole thing over again. You drink some coffee, you get on the treadmill, you do all your business, you're holding up your end of the bargain, but you're really grouchy because what is there at the end of the day except for that the cycle continues? That's what I was feeling for a long time, whether it was when I was in my 20s and I was living in New York, and then I lived in London, and then I lived in Los Angeles, and these are all very expensive places, and I basically had no money and tons of student debt I was drowning in, and lots of credit cards that I was trying to live off of and not able to pay. And no one had ever taught me how to think about finance, and also I was an actor. So here's the thing about me I haven't said yet. I tried for a long time to not become an actor. I knew from a young age that I wanted to be in the arts and become a master of something creative, because that's just where I flourished. That's where I felt at home, and I knew that I should be doing that kind of thing, but I didn't know what it should be. All I knew is that the happiest times in my life were when I was in a play with a group of actors and a director and creating something together. And I loved analyzing texts and trying to figure out what the writer intended and what made this character tick, and becoming that person, and the challenge of all this. And so after trying not to become an actor for a long time and listening to a lot of gremlins in my head telling me that that would be the silliest thing to do, and you're going to be rubbish and everyone's going to laugh at you. And I finally stuck to my guns, and I went to drama school and I became an actor. But then the sad thing about being an actor is drama school is all fun and games, literally fun and games. And you're in a very protective environment, and everyone's learning the craft of being an actor and taking it seriously, and you're very supported. And it's filled with all this good energy. And then you get spit out into the real world and the entertainment industry. I think some of you might know this or heard this. It's a cruel, cruel mistress. It is not a fun place to be. So I pursued being an actor for a long time, possibly longer than I should have. But everyone always said, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. And then you move from New York to Los Angeles and they say, oh no, it takes 10 years of being in Los Angeles to become an overnight success, so on and so forth. And this whole time I had myriad gremlins crawling onto my back. I already had quite a lot of serious physical symptoms, which now I know are related very much to stress. But most of them actually came from being a teenager, having an eating disorder, dealing with trying to be an all-A student and get into a good school, and the stress that you get from that. So even as a young child, I've heard recently that we're exposed to stress in our mother's womb. So if our mother is stressed, even as a fetus, your gene expression and how you develop is affected by the amount of stress. So that's why they tell every mother who's pregnant, like, oh, just be calm and don't be stressed, which is easier said than done. But anyway, back to being an actor. I slogged at it for a long time, and I was quite ill the whole time. I had really horrible IBS, which I had developed as a teenager. I had chronic fatigue, which I had developed as a teenager. I had Raynaud's, which is a circulation disorder I developed as a teenager. And none of these things I had any treatment for because I had no health insurance and I had no one to guide me. I mean, this was 20 years ago. So even then, people were kind of getting therapy a bit more back then, but I had no idea where to go. I just thought that I was a broken person. I just thought that I was a defective model, basically. I moved to Los Angeles and was very lonely, had a few friends, but we were all basically actors or working in that industry and feeling disjointed and floating and working really hard, but not seeing much for our efforts. So, and on top of all this, I worked as a waitress and a bartender because that's what you do. So I worked nights and I was up until late, and then I'd have a couple glasses of wine, and it became a habit that I needed to have a few glasses of wine every night to wind myself down, to cope with the stress, and to send myself to sleep. And then sleep would come and it would leave just like that, and I would have about 5 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep, and that was it. And then I was on that treadmill. Finally, at some point, towards the end of this time period, I thought, I can't do this anymore. And I think you know when you're going crazy. Los Angeles had really ground me down. I had started seriously considering the fact that maybe the answer to my problem was plastic surgery, which is not something I would have ever thought of before. That wasn't me. It wasn't the kind of values that I have or the background. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with plastic surgery, but when you're a young person and you feel pressured by an industry that you're not good enough, and that the answer would be that you should change the shape of your face or, get liposuction or something. It's not healthy. And I knew this. I knew that I had broken from my values. I had broken from myself, and I was hurtling down a path that seemed very foreign from where my intentions were originally. And so the first step in this was just kind of take a step back. I trained as a Pilates teacher around this time period because I'd been doing Pilates for so many years, because it really helped me as someone with chronic fatigue, who loves to exercise, but would find that if I really pushed myself hard, which I did a lot, I tortured myself by making myself go for a run for an hour every day, and then I'd be completely exhausted and dizzy and foggy-headed and lethargic for the rest of the day. But I would do this most days, never thinking, it's obviously too much for you. No, instead I thought, you're pathetic. You need to do even more. Like, you'll get better if you do more. If you push yourself harder, you'll get better, which wasn't the case. And it's not the case for some people. But I wasn't listening to myself. I wasn't listening to my body. I was torturing myself. I was punishing myself. And so Pilates, just doing the program, I thought, it's a year. And when I come out the other end, it will be like my version of doing a marathon. It felt like a great opportunity to get back to myself, and also to jettison working in the service industry and not have to work at night, which made me feel horrible because of the lack of sleep. And so I did that. And at the same time, I was very much coming around to the idea that I had to quit acting, which seemed like a pretty devastating step, because it felt like I was admitting the fact that I had failed. But the truth of the matter is that it wasn't serving me. It didn't align with my values. And I didn't know how to frame it this way at the time. It just felt like I was at the end of a road. I was at the edge of a cliff, and I was lost, and I didn't know where to go. And it was around this time that an ex-boyfriend came back into my life. And we had been together, and it had been great, but we had been long distance. So we had to call it off after a couple of years of trying to make it work. And that was 7 years previous. So for 7 years, I had been single. He had been with somebody, though. But his long-term relationship had ended, and he had come to Los Angeles to see his friend. But he had contacted me over Facebook, and we arranged to get lunch. But then he stopped at a taco truck on the way to our lunch, which was quite annoying, because then I had to eat lunch in front of him. I did eat some salad though. And long story short, we spent most of that trip that he came to spend with his friend, we spent it together instead. And it was glorious. It was great. But then he had to go home, and it seemed like the end of that little mirage. But then it got me thinking, I had been writing, I had been playing around with producing and directing, and I had gotten lots of encouragement, especially in the writing. So I thought, what if I hatch a plan and I accumulate even more student debt and even more credit card debt, and I move back to the UK and I do a master's in screenwriting. And you might think, why did you leave Los Angeles to do a master's in screenwriting? Shouldn't you have stayed in Los Angeles? Maybe, but the point was, I had done drama school in the UK, and that is where I had spent the happiest time in my adult life. And Charlie was in the UK. So it just seemed like several birds, one stone, and an answer to my free fall. Now, I'm painting that as quite a rosy picture. It wasn't really all rosy. I felt quite unhinged. Or disarmed, what would be the word? I felt in disarray making this choice. And I did feel like I was jumping. I was leaping maybe a little bit too fast. Maybe I hadn't considered everything. But in hindsight, I also think that's because I was scared. I was really scared of following my gut because I was in a survivalist place. I was in a state of fear, of cortisol, of stress. And what happens when you're in that state, now I know, is that you hunker down. You don't make any changes. You try to protect yourself. And what that makes people do is not change. They don't move forward. They just try to hibernate and stick to their guns and ride out whatever storm. But what I was doing was just flagrantly flailing. But I was also listening to my gut. And so I jumped. I got a bunch more student debt. I got some credit cards, and I moved to the UK. And I landed there, but it was quite a different landscape than where I had been when I was at drama school. When you're in drama school, like I said before, you're in this protective bubble. Everyone's young and excited and happy and supportive. And every single day you show up in the morning and you leave in the evening, and your whole day is structured and filled. When you're a writer, you're by yourself most of the time. And it was a brand new skill. It was something I didn't have confidence in. It was something I wasn't sure if it was the right thing for me to be doing. I know that I could be good at it, potentially, and that I had gotten lots of encouragement from producers and people who I had submitted my writing to. But was it the right thing for me? It was room for the gremlins and the goblins to pile up. So yeah, I like to picture these gremlins again, like the goblins from Labyrinth. Just throw on some glitter and some slime and some cute little Cockney accents, and then have them say really nasty things. That's what it was like. But it was a mix of blessings and this kind of real limbo period. Limbo where I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what could define me anymore. But I was just trying to put one foot in front of the other. And we ended up getting engaged, Charlie and I. And we got married. And just as my program was ending, I got pregnant. So as you can imagine, jumping out of the frying pan into another frying pan and then into the fire. I didn't have a career anymore. I had just trained to do something I didn't have a huge amount of confidence in, even though I graduated with highest honors and my screenplay was optioned and I had, lots of positive feedback. But the gremlins were keeping me feeling very unsure about myself. I had moved to the country with only one bag, and I didn't have any money to buy anything for myself, to get any more clothes. I was now pregnant. And And pregnancy, you just have to surrender to, don't you? I knew that I needed to try to be all serene and stress-free, and I tried to do that. And I was teaching Pilates, which was fine, but also I didn't have much confidence in myself as a Pilates teacher because I had only just graduated from the Pilates program as well. So here I was in a time in my life, my mid-30s, when I should be at the top of my game, and I wasn't. And that was really hard. And then the stress just started to pile on. The baby was born, there was no sleep, and life became all about the child. And I thought, this is fine, this is a small time in my life, and I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to be the best housefrau I can be. And I made really magnificent baby food. And I made sure that all of us had good meals, and I cleaned the house, and I taught Pilates on weekends and in the evenings to try and make some money. But I was really just frayed at the edges, that I had no time for myself. I had no time to think. I had no time, no space, and the voices in the back of my head were just kicking up, and were just running script after script about just frustration that there was no time for myself. And I wasn't exercising because there was no time for me to exercise. I was teaching other people exercise, but I wasn't exercising myself, and I had very little sleep, and my mental state was deteriorating. And then I had 2 miscarriages, and again, my mental state continued to deteriorate. My stress increased. Trying to get pregnant is very stressful, as some of you can attest to. We ended up moving out of London, and for a while, we lived with my mother-in-law, and I got pregnant again. And throughout that pregnancy, I had bleeds, and every single time I had a bleed, I assumed that it was a miscarriage, but it wasn't. There was still a heartbeat. But then again, I'd have a bleed, I'd have to go to the hospital, and I would assume there wouldn't be a heartbeat, but there was. But the pregnancy kept ticking on in this stressful way. And then the baby came, and it was beautiful. It was a lovely boy. But then it started to cry at 6 weeks, and it didn't stop crying for 3 months because it had colic. So add this on top of the mental deterioration, all the gremlins, and not taking care of myself, not exercising, drinking wine to settle myself down. The baby ended up rejecting my breast milk, so that was fun as well. All these things kept happening, and then COVID hit. So, what could be more stressful than that? And my eldest was then home from school. My little one was about a year old at this point. And finally I got work. I got work as a writer. So there was so much pressure on me to do this. But then also I was home with the children the entire time. My husband was working the entire time. And on top of this, we bought a house, and I was supposed to be renovating it in COVID, managing the builders, planning the renovations, and all this other stuff. So yeah, I'm not going to candy coat it. I felt like I was losing my mind. And it's around this time that I had a moment when I was so angry. I was so overwhelmed. I was shaking with just this exhaustion of mental strain. And I remember thinking in my head, you are giving yourself cancer. You are going to get cancer from this. So pin that little thought. I started to develop symptoms, strange physical symptoms. I had a cold for 6 months, which isn't normal. And I know it was a running series of colds. It wasn't just one cold, but still, it was horrible. I had all the lymphs on my neck blow up like little pearls all the way down my neck, and I couldn't move my head. I got horrible sinus infections. My hands started to shake. My legs and my arms were numb, and my hands and my feet were tingling, on top of the IBS, which I had mainly gotten under control, but the chronic fatigue was really up in arms. I was having weeks of malaise and this heaviness, like there was a wet blanket over my head. And on top of this, doing all the other stuff. And I'd opened a Pilates studio because the writing couldn't work, because I couldn't fit it in. I couldn't fit in the writing. So I leaned into Pilates, even though I wasn't supposed to be a Pilates teacher. I was supposed to be a writer at this point. And then my youngest was going to go into school. And I thought, this could be the end of the tunnel. I might finally get a chance to sort things out and get back to myself. And this whole time I had been feeling this anger and resentment towards my husband for having a career and having a job that he can just go to and come back from, and he has a solid 8 hours that he can spend doing something and achieve something. I felt resentment towards Pilates for being something that I loved but wasn't what I should be doing. It wasn't, I'm good at it, but it wasn't my purpose. Do you know what I mean? It didn't fulfill me in the way that I needed to be fulfilled. And I resented all the housework, the constant chores, the laundry that piles up into a mountain and never seems to get depleted, even though you're constantly folding laundry and putting it away. The menu planning that didn't get done because there was no time, or you got halfway done, but then you get overwhelmed by it and the kids are hollering at you for something. Trying to keep on top of the kids and make sure that you're giving them all the love and support that you should, but then not feeling present, not enjoying this time period with them, knowing that it's fleeting and you're going to regret this, and then resenting yourself for all of this, for feeling all this stuff, for blaming anyone. I knew that Charlie, my husband, was working really hard, and then I felt guilty for resenting him. I felt guilty for resenting Pilates because it had really been there to support me through this period, and it did bring me joy when I got to do it myself. But I still wasn't exercising. I was not sleeping still. I was drinking every night to get to sleep. And my mental health was in the tubes with these gremlins. And then I found a lump in my breast. So that brings me to the health crisis that I alluded to in the trailer. And this lump was quite a sizable lump. And I went to the doctor and he said, oh, yeah, that is a big lump, which doesn't help, by the way. But then he had told me, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I feel like you can be optimistic about this. But he sent me to get a mammogram, and the person who did the ultrasound before the mammogram was quite dismissive almost, which isn't helpful either. Thank you very much. You want to feel like, you made a good choice in raising a concern. But she sent me in to have a mammogram, and the mammogram was the first mammogram I'd ever had, which is, who invented that machine? I think we can all agree. If you haven't had a mammogram, you've got a delight in store for you. They basically take your boob and squeeze it between two plates of plastic until it feels like your skin is going to be ripped off your chest wall. So why can't they invent something better? Anyway, but when I came out of the mammogram, that same doctor who was quite dismissive had all of a sudden changed her demeanor. It was very bedside manner, very contrite. And that's when I knew that something was up. Basically, then she rattled off a bunch of medical speak I couldn't follow, but something about we need to do a biopsy. So I was sent in to do a biopsy. This was a week later, so a whole week of thinking about this stuff. And this whole time I was trying not to upset Charlie. I didn't want to upset the apple cart because he was working really hard. And also his father had died of pancreatic cancer. And it was quite a trigger, I think, or so I thought. I do a lot of projecting onto my husband and hiding my thoughts, my feelings, because I'm afraid of affecting him badly. But the net result of that is usually that I just bottle everything up and then want to explode. So also not a good thing. Don't do that, which contributes to my stress. But then I got to the biopsy, and again, they put you in that effing mammogram machine. So great. And then they stick you with a needle and they suck out bits of tissue from inside your breast. So that's fun as well. And they had to do it about 12 times because they couldn't get the right angle. Fun. I came out battered and bruised. And by this point, things had started to hit home. I felt like I was on a trajectory to something. And you just kind of don't know what to think when it happens to you because you don't know how bad it's going to be. No one really talks about the nuances of breast cancer until you're in that position. And then you get told so much stuff. It's overwhelming and it is really complicated. There's lots of variables. There's lots of types of breast cancer and things that feed breast cancer. But I digress. They said it would be 2 weeks before I knew my results. A week later, I had a call from the hospital and they wanted to see me. So again, you kind of know something's up if they're calling you in as opposed to telling you over the phone. And when I arrived at the hospital, and I didn't bring my husband because, again, I was trying to protect him, and I think I was in denial that this was going to be a big deal. I kind of felt like, no, you just protect everyone around you and you deal with this yourself kind of attitude. And my friend had me very kindly, and she was almost making, I don't know, being more cautious around me emotionally than I was being with myself, which is a bit disarming as well, because I felt like I should probably be more upset than I am. And then the nurse was very funny. The nurse who first saw me and led me in to talk to the surgeon was watching me very carefully, watching to see how I was reacting emotionally. But it was very obvious that she was watching me. It was like she was holding a box of tissues behind her back and waiting for the right moment to spring it on me as the hero to the breakdown. And so that also was a big tell of what I was in for. And then the surgeon, bless her, I didn't meet with an oncologist. I just saw a surgeon, and she said, "You've got breast cancer, and we've booked you in for surgery next Thursday." So there you go. You're hurtling down this path. But basically, she explained, and it was really hard to keep up, but I had DCIS, which is ductal carcinoma in situ, which means that the cancer is in the ducts and it has not become tumors yet. So the good news was it was classed as stage 0 in the breast cancer spectrum, which was great news. But they would still have to take some lymph nodes to test and biopsy and see if there's any cancer in there, that it's gone from the breast into the lymph nodes, which would mean it could have spread to other parts of the body. So that gives you plenty of anxiety. And she basically described that I was going to have a lumpectomy, which meant that she said, imagine your breast is a fruitcake covered in marzipan. We're going to cut open the marzipan, open it up, scoop out the bad stuff, and then move around the rest of the cake and fill in the hole. And then we're going to close the marzipan back up. So delightful imagery, thinking of my breast as a lovely fruitcake. But, it felt doable. It felt like you just do it. You just go along with what the doctor said, and she knows what she's doing. And when they're done taking the bad stuff out, they take some samples from around that area that they've left. They call that the margins. They test the margins to see if there's anything they've missed. And she said if they do miss something, then it will be back to surgery again. But, she was optimistic. Everyone's optimistic. So I just thought, okay, we can do this. And then she said, and, you can expect you're going to need to be in bed for 4 to 6 weeks. And this moment, may I tell you, this moment was like the light shining from the heavens onto me. All of a sudden, I felt like, the universe acts in such funny ways. All I've wanted this whole time is a break. I've wanted some time for myself. I've wanted someone to take care of me. I've wanted someone to save me. And here I am. The universe is saying, we're going to save you, and we're going to give you time to rest. But the only price you have to pay is it's cancer. And you've got to have surgery on your boob like a fruitcake. And I said, I'll take it. If I get to watch a bunch of Netflix, I'm there. So the next week I go in on a Thursday, bright and early, and it's going to be day surgery. They say I'll be out by dinner. And I go through a series of preliminary things. I get some radioactive stuff injected into my breast so that it can travel up to the lymph nodes. And then they'll be able to see which lymph nodes are the sentinel nodes, which are the ones that are the gatekeepers, the first nodes that would have any cancer in them, if there was any to be found. During the biopsy, they had left these kind of titanium seeds at the points where they needed to take from my breast. So they put me back in the mammogram machine, and they put these wires, they inserted wires into the breast tissue down to the seeds to kind of guide the way. So that was great. But it really wasn't very painful. They numbed it, and the radioactive thing was a bit ouchy and stingy, but, it wasn't that bad. And then I went in for surgery, and they put me under general anesthesia, which I was very excited about because I thought, I'm going to get to sleep. It's been 20 years of not sleeping, and now I'm going to get to sleep. So I go under, and I had a fantastic, deep sleep. And then they're saying, Jenny, wake up. And I woke up, and I don't know why they have to wake you up like that. Everything was fine, but they, for some reason, have to wake you up, like, quickly. I don't know. They had to do it in this way that was really jarring. And I woke up and I was in the recovery room, and there were lots of beds around and other patients recovering, and they had given me some juice, and I just felt amazing. I felt high because I was actually on morphine, and I felt so grateful. I felt this overpowering sense of gratitude and warmth and love. And it felt amazing, actually. And I got let out. I did a lot of texting to people saying, hey, everything's fine. I'm all out, blah, blah. I got let out in time to go home for dinner. I was set upstairs in bed. I was going to get to be in bed for 4 to 6 weeks. And then I went to sleep. And in the morning I woke up and I had the most horrendous pain. I thought I was dying. My boob had swollen to the size of the biggest porn star breast you could think. Take that and then add a few more pumps of air to it, like it's just about to explode like a balloon. That's what my breast was like. And I really felt like I was dying. I can't really describe the feeling, but it felt really bad. It felt like doom. And we called an ambulance, and the ambulance then came and they said, I think you could probably drive. So Charlie put me in the car and we drove 20 minutes to the hospital and got into A&E, and they took us straight in to see the surgeons because it was obvious that I was really bad. Took us straight in to see the surgeons, and it was the same surgical team from the day before. I don't know if they had gone home or anything. I kind of hope they had. But they said this is very unusual that this would happen. I had a hematoma. Don't ask me to explain what that is, but it has to do with blood. And I had a infection. So it was on its way to sepsis. And so they rushed me into surgery, and they did another emergency surgery to fix it all. And they put me on an antibiotic drip, and I was in the hospital for a few days. So, it was kind of like the universe giving me a little kick, saying, we're going to give you your 4 to 6 weeks, but, this is a bumpy road. It's not all, you don't get everything you wish for right away. Just keep vigilant. And, I had 4 weeks of bed rest, and I watched lots of Netflix. I think I watched all the Netflix, listened to lots of Gardener's Question Time, anything fluffy and light and wholesome and warm and comforting that I could find. And I filled my mind and my space with input. I did not let my brain ruminate, but I so enjoyed being in bed. I felt at once extremely guilty and so appreciative. And my friends had been amazing. These people who I had relied on for the last so many years. Yeah, I had really leaned into social interactions as that ray of hope in my life. And they had all come to my aid in this time of need. And there were play dates planned for the kids and rides to school and back and meal trains. And my mother-in-law did amazing cooking for us. And poor Charlie was taking on all the kids and working at the same time. And it was really stressful. So I felt very guilty, but I also felt this huge uplift of love and gratitude. And that was inspiring. And then I got news from the doctors that the margins were not clear, that they would have to go back and do more surgery. And the options were multiple options. First of all, they could either go in and do another lumpectomy, another fruitcake surgery, but it would probably leave the breast quite deformed. Or I could have a mastectomy, straightforward, just take off the breast and have a flat chest. Or I could have reconstruction with a silicone breast, or I could have reconstruction with my own flesh, which usually is a tummy tuck kind of option. So people go and take fat from their stomach area and they put it up where the boob used to be, and plastic surgeons do it. So it looks really good. It looks like a boob. And then they reconstruct a nipple. That was the worst part of this idea, was that they would have to take the nipple. And for some reason, that just felt like, the insult to injury to me. I had to get over that idea. But my gut said that I really wanted to have the reconstruction from my own parts, because if you have a silicone breast, you have to get it replaced every 10 to 14 years, which would mean more surgery. And I just wanted this to be the end. And it could be a fine choice for somebody else, but for me, I just wanted this to I didn't want more surgery after this. And also, if it was from my own bits, it would feel warm to the touch and it would start to sag with me naturally. I really wanted everything to just sag as I get older. I didn't want this one sprightly boob that seemed to defy aging and the rest of me is falling apart around it. That would be, maybe actually it would be a shining light in that time period, who knows. But the caveat again, the universe was not going to be clear and forthcoming. Again, it had given me this new hurdle that would mean up to 6 weeks if I get a straightforward mastectomy of bed rest, or up to 3 months of recovery, up to a year of recovery, really, with the reconstruction from my own bits. But, I really wanted this more natural surgery, and 3 months of recovery sounded actually fantastic. More Netflix, please. But then the other caveat was that they had to test me for blood disorder because I had had the hematoma, and because in one of my miscarriages during the surgery, I had had a blood event and lost a lot of blood, and they wanted to see if I had some kind of blood clotting issue. And so then I went and had lots of tests done, which then became a 6-week march, waiting for results, getting more tests done. 6 weeks of being up in the air. And also in that 6 weeks, my 4 weeks, initial weeks of bed rest had ended. The kids had gotten out of school for Christmas. And everything suddenly returned back to normal. In the time period that I was having bed rest, I had this strange sensation, like an electrical current, like an electrical jolt. If I tried to do anything that was too much for my body would literally shock itself. It was so strange. I have no idea what that was, but it was kind of amazing. It was like a dog with an electrical fence and that collar around its neck, and it's one of those invisible electric fences, and it tries to go past the electric fence and it gets a shock. It was like that. Every time I tried to push myself too far, my body said, no, no. And the universe said, you've been wanting this, get back up in bed, Netflix, get back to it. But by 4 weeks, that had kind of stopped, and I felt this, I could be okay, but I'm not sure. And then the kids were home for Christmas holidays, and Charlie was the only person doing sole childcare, and I felt extremely guilty. So I came downstairs and I started to help, and then everything just went back to the way it was. And that's really when I fell to pieces, because I realized my 4 to 6 weeks of bed rest had ended, and it hadn't been enough. I was still a shell of myself, even more so because I had just had this surgery. I had breast cancer still inside of me. I was looking at getting a mastectomy and reconstruction. And the main feeling was that if I died from all of this, what if there is more? What if the universe keeps giving me more and more? What if it is in my body someplace else? If I die, I have not achieved the things that I set out to, the things that I aspired to as a young person. I have not fulfilled myself. I have not found my purpose. And I don't want to die just being a glorified house frau. I don't want to just do the cooking and the cleaning and the child minding. I want to have a bigger purpose in life. I want to use my brain for whatever purpose it is best at. And I want to figure out what that is. And I want to become the master of that thing. I want to have flow and satisfaction, and I want to have the rest of it too. And I want to be a great parent, but I need this for myself. And I felt in that moment that if I didn't do something, life was just going to keep trudging ahead, and it was all going to go exactly back to where it was before. My hands would start to shake again. I would have strange physical symptoms. I'd be sick all the time. Things had to change. And so I confronted my husband. Confronted is the wrong word. I stormed into his study and I put my foot down, literally, and I said, and I was just irate. And it was just because I had been ruminating over this thought in my head. It was running around and around and around, like, this cannot continue. And I went down and I said, things cannot go back to the way they were. Things cannot go back to the way they were. I just kept saying it. And he stood up and he came over to me and he just gave me a hug. And he said, do you want to talk about it? And I said, no. And I ran off. Because I didn't know what to say. All I knew was I needed help. I needed things to change, because the other feeling was that I wanted to run away. The feeling was I wanted to burn it all to the ground. The feeling was I couldn't appreciate, I couldn't feel love for anything. I was vastly unhappy. Yet I had all this beautiful stuff at my fingertips, but I could not be present to enjoy any of it. It's hard to describe the bottom of a mental breakdown, I guess. And perhaps mine doesn't sound as dramatic as it could be if it was in a movie or a book. But I'll remind you, I was relying heavily on drinking wine and self-medicating with caffeine, and I would say medicating by finding social interactions with friends and filling my time and my space. When I was doing my house chores, I was constantly listening to podcasts. I never gave myself any space to think, because if I gave myself space to think, the thoughts were really dark. And I got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. I knew something had to change. Either I had to run away, or I had to get the help that I needed. And I had to have my husband on board with this. And so we went for a walk, because we found always that this was a really nice way for us to communicate with each other when we were both really stressed, when we're both feeling against a wall, and also when we feel really far away from each other. And that's how I often felt. I felt like we're living this parallel life and we're in survival mode and we are just trying to battle it out every day, and we're feeling all these things, but we're not talking to each other. Whether it's because we're trying to preserve some kind of sense of normality or peace by not bringing up any of the ugly things, or because we are afraid of what we might say to each other, we are not talking. And at the same time, this might be more me than him. He might be fine. But this is what I felt. I felt like he knew that I was a powder keg and he was being careful around me. And I didn't want someone to be careful around me. I wanted someone to save me. I wanted someone to give me space and time to figure out a plan. And that was the most disconcerting thing about this time, was like, what do you do? How do you go from feeling completely lost and empty? And I think this had also been happening since I left Los Angeles. It had been happening since I decided to not be an actor and to become this other person, and then not having any time to develop that other person. And then you have children come into your life, and children, when they come into your life, they take you away anyway. They take your time and your sense of self, and it gets completely, it gets kidnapped. And that is where I was. And the only thing I could say, I felt like I had to fill the space with a practical direction. And I said to him on this walk, I need to stop doing Pilates. Pilates needs to not be my main job. I need to be able to have a job that I love, that I want to do. And I'm not sure if writing is the thing. I'm not sure if I picked the right choice, and I want to have space and time to figure it out. And he was supportive of this, but I could tell that he was anxious about it as well. Anxious because we needed the money that I bring in by teaching Pilates. We were completely reliant on it. So how do you transition when there's no time? How do you transition? How do you find a new career when there's no time for anything anyway? But I thought, well, I'm going to have 3 months. If I get to do the cancer surgery of my dreams and I get to have my reconstruction for my own body bits, that means I have 3 months of no work when I need to be resting. So I will concentrate on putting my nose to the grindstone and figuring out my new path. And that's where I'm going to end this episode, and we'll come back to the next bit, because the next bit is that this was a bit of a red herring. What a good little cliffhanger to end with, the red herring. But I'm telling you what it is, so sorry, no surprise there. But it was trying to find my purpose, just, full on switch gears. Turned out not to be exactly the thing that I needed, but something else was waiting in the wings. So yeah, join me next time, and we're going to talk about the end of this little journey, and how it led me here, and how it led me into learning all about neuroscience and all this fun stuff. And then the next episode after that, were you aware that last week was Sleep Awareness Week? No? I was not aware of this either. None of us were aware it was Sleep Awareness Week. They're not doing a great job at advertising this. But sleep has been the thing that I have become obsessed with, I should say, or intrigued by. I've been completely enthralled by sleep. That's what I'll say. When I started to research into sleep, I was initially very frightened by all the science that's come out in the last couple years about sleep, but then so mesmerized by actually how mysterious and beautiful it is, and how much we need it, and why we need certain types of sleep. Certain times of the night are so important, and all the components that make up good sleep. It's quite a beautiful, interesting ballet. So I'm going to have the next episode after that. I'm going to tell you about what I've learned about sleep and the hope and the dreams that we can have from good sleep. And then from there, we're going to go on, and I'm going to talk about things like affirmations and manifestation and vision boards and what I've been doing with those. Talk about dopamine, talk more about cortisol, and then let's talk about oxytocin next time as well, and how you can kind of game these things, how you can manipulate them and understand them in your body so that they're not totally in control of you, you're in control of them. Anyway, thanks for coming on this walk. And as before, please like, follow, subscribe, share, do all that good stuff, especially follow. If I get enough followers, then it means that I can attract on the guests that I'd like to talk to, because I won't be a complete nobody. So please do come along with me, and I really look forward to sharing things with you and seeing you next time. I'm hoping this information will make us all that little bit happier, give us that little bit more incentive to empower ourselves, which might translate to influencing others and bringing everyone into a happier space. And then we can make change. Maybe we can make the world a bit more enlightened. That's the path we're going down. All right, go forth and put some welly into it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.